So in this video, we're going to talk about entity relationship diagrams. And when I say entity relationship diagram, all I mean is a document or something that you can use to communicate ideas to another person that talks about what are the things that we're talking about and how are they related. Okay, so it's important to kind of understand that we use these diagrams in a lot of different ways, right? For example, a mind map can be a form of an entity relationship diagram that we're showing what are the things and which things are connected. On the other end of the spectrum, we can use a very formal definition of an entity relationship diagram to, for example, specify how a database needs to be set up. So when we're talking about these diagrams, a lot depends on who you're talking to and what are the ideas that you're trying to convey. And I'll walk through some of this as we work. In this video, I'm going to be using Lucidchart. I'm going to be using really basic features of Lucidchart, so I'm not going to focus very much here on the software and how to use it. I'm going to focus more on what these diagrams are and how we might use them. So I'm going to create a new blank chart, and most of this software works the same. And the reason that we use something like Lucidchart instead of Illustrator is that Lucidchart is going to keep my relationships. So if I, let's say, have two things and I relate them, right? So I say there's a relationship. Programs like this are going to preserve my relationships in a way that that Illustrator won't, right? So this is the reason that I use something like Lucidchart instead of Illustrator. And if you were doing a really simple diagram, you could use Illustrator. Okay, so at the very basic level, we're going to be relating things. So let's say that we're working on a diagram related to a zoo. Okay, so what are the things in a zoo and how are they related? So let's say animals have trainers, right? So I'm going to draw a line between animals and trainers. And then I'm also going to think about this relationship. So there's a relationship here, and there's different ways that I can specify that relationship depending on the level of specificity and who I'm talking to. So let's say if I'm just talking to somebody and I'm doing like a domain model or something more like a mind map, I might not need to say much about this relationship, right? Or I might need to say animals has a trainer, okay? And maybe we have like shows. This is more like SeaWorld, right? So maybe animals appear in shows and I don't need an arrow here, okay? So the level of specificity is depending on who you're talking to. Or if I was going back to a client, I probably wouldn't even label my relationships like this. Okay, if we go up a level and we start thinking about something more like a content model, or if I just need to be more specific about how these things are related, I can start adding cardinality to my relationships. So I can start saying, okay, animals have a relationship to shows, but can an animal be in more than one show or can it only be in one show, right? That might be something that I need to specify in my model here. So let's say animals can be in many shows, right? So this is a technical technical language that we're using now that lets me communicate to maybe another designer, maybe another content strategist, or maybe a database manager, the relationship here. And can shows have more than one animal or can shows only have one animal? Well, they can probably have more than one animal, right? And let's say maybe in this system, an animal can only have one trainer. So I could specify that an animal only has one trainer and a trainer can train multiple animals, okay? And the reason that this becomes useful now is if I'm planning out an interface, I know that in whatever space, if I have a page for this particular animal, okay, this is Shamu. Shamu can only have one trainer. That tells me that whenever I'm talking about who Shamu's trainer is, I don't need to have a list of trainers there. I only need to have one trainer specified there, okay? So that's how cardinality can become really useful. And this would be usually used within a team that's planning out a product. And I wouldn't necessarily show this to a client because a client doesn't understand and doesn't care about this level of technical notation. So I'm going to reset these really quick. One thing that I might do though is if I'm, say, communicating with a client, or if I'm just thinking to myself, right? These diagrams can be a really important tool to just kind of organize things in my head. So let's say that I have certain messages that I want to get across on this site. So like, let's say I want to have a message about healthy animals, okay? I might map that message to the content resources that I'm creating. So at this point, I'm assuming that a show is a page on the site, and each animal has a page on the site, and each trainer has a page on the site. So if I'm thinking about where my core messages are going to be communicated across my site, I could maybe use colors to think about that myself, but also to communicate that to a client and help to kind of make those connections between this is the strategy that I've given you, this is the messaging strategy that we're working on, and this is how it's going to be directly implemented on specific pages on your site. So I might have different colors for all my different messages and then show across my pages where we're communicating those messages. All right, I'm going to get rid of this. The last thing I want to look at is if we're doing a more technical diagram, we can use some different shapes, and I'm going to go ahead and add entity relationship shapes. So entity relationship, when it's used in this format, is kind of a technical term, and it basically means a way of showing database relationships. So instead of just having a square, we're now going to have a square with fields attached to it, or attributes. And this lets me say, okay, I have a thing in this world called an animal, right? And practically what this means is I have animals that are stored in my database, and those animals have attributes. So let's just really quickly say that animals have a name, they have an age, and the other way that you can use this is for things that are related to the interface. So it's really common for us to have a featured image specified for everything in our database, or all of our content that's stored in our database, because when we then have an interface, or when we have a website, a web page representing this animal, we can pull that featured image in different ways. Okay, so this is now an entity relationship diagram, or a more technical form of that. And now if I have, say, a show, and show is going to have probably a venue and a time, and it probably also has a featured image. And then I can connect these. And this tells me that I'm not going to worry about cardinality right here, ignore that. So this is useful for me to communicate to a database manager or a backend developer, because this tells them with the cardinality and the attributes exactly how to create a database of these objects. This is also really useful if I'm an interface designer, because if I'm laying out a wireframe, or I'm sketching a page, or I'm building a page for an animal, I know all of the different pieces of information that I can use to pull that page, right? These attributes are literally the things that will or can go on the page. So this form of diagram can be really useful for talking within the team, and also for talking, say, across designers and content strategists and backend developers, or front-end developers and backend developers. Okay, so that is a brief overview of different ways that we use relationship diagrams. At the most technical, there are very specific rules for how these are used and what they mean. If you're an engineer, for example, there are right and wrong ways to do this. But a lot of times as, say, content strategists or as communication professionals, we're using these diagrams to either analyze something just within ourselves, or to communicate something to a client or someone else on their team. So we have more flexibility, and we really need to think about what are the goals of this document, and how am I how am I then getting those goals across to a specific person who understands things and doesn't understand some other things? So you really have to put a lot of thought into how you create these. Really quickly, when I'm done in Lucidchart, I can export my diagram, and I can export it either as an image file. So if I just want to send this to someone and show them, I would send them probably a ping. But I can also export this as a PDF, and I can import that PDF into Illustrator if for some reason I want to make this prettier or to add some information that I'm not able to within this software.